welcome back to my YouTube channel. This morning has been a little bit wild. I tried to film this video with my daughter, who's 1 and recently learned to walk, and let me just tell you that that is not a good idea. She's currently sleeping just there, so I'm hoping I'm not talking too loud to wake her up, so we'll see how we go. Let's get started. Okay. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the books that I read in February. Now, in February, it was a very busy month for me in terms of I had full-time uni, full-time placement or work, and also looking after my baby. So it was very busy. So my reading probably wasn't as good as it could have been. But with that being said, I read 9 books this month, which is an amazing amount of books. But I wanted to add that that wasn't really 9 finished books. I read 9, but probably 3 of those were DNFs in the end. So if I hadn't have DNF'd those books, I probably would have read more like 5 books. So with that being said, let's start with our first book. First up, we have Scarred by Emily McIntyre. This is the second book in the Never After series, which I read Hooked, which is the first book in January. So I'll pick this one back up, which this is a dark romance genre, and it's a retelling of The Lion King. So that was a really interesting premise going into the book, and I was like, how is this going to work? But it was really cool. So the main male character was part of the Fasa royal family who ran this country, and the main female character was the queen of a different country, or a different province of the country, where the main Fasa royal family had indicted these laws that really disadvantaged her province. So she really hated this royal family. So she arrived to the palace under the pretense that she was going to marry the king, the current king, which is actually the main male character's brother. So she was under the pretense that she was going to marry the king, but really she was in there spying and trying to figure out how she was going to take the royal family down. There's a lot of plot twists and some turns, and it's really interesting, and I actually really highly recommend this book. I do have to say that I did skip the spicy scenes, and there was a fair bit of violence in this book. So just some trigger warnings if you're going to read this book, maybe check those out before you go into it. But it's not too dark. It's sort of just like, whoa, okay, moving on. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I rated it 3.25. Next up, we have Richard by Emily McIntyre, which, if you haven't guessed, it is the next book in the series. I didn't read these ones back to back, but I'm just going to talk about them back to back because it makes the most sense in my brain. So this is a Wizard of Oz retelling, and I know that this might be shocking to some of you, but I actually don't know the story of the Wizard of Oz. So it didn't really influence my opinion of the book at all, and it didn't really link up very much for me, but I still enjoyed the book. So the main character is the daughter of like the biggest drug ring leader in the country. The main male character is undercover as a DEA agent and is trying to discover who is producing and manufacturing and selling these drugs. And he finds out that it is her, but they're falling in love, and what do you know? Which I did really like in this book, where it was actually the female main character who was sort of the dark villainous one, and it wasn't the man, because that's what's been happening in the last 2 books in the series. So I did like that. That was a little bit of a twist, a little bit different. I rated this one a 3.25 as well. I really liked it, but there wasn't anything revolutionary about it, and it wasn't like it was super different. It was just a cool read, and I liked it, but that was it. Next book I read was All That's Left Unsaid by Tracy Lien. This book is a really interesting one, and I actually have a bit of a hard time rating it because the premise of the book and the whole overarching themes and themes and discussions that this book creates, I really like, and I really loved those overarching themes. But the actual reading experience wasn't my favorite. I rated this book a 3.5 out of 5, and it lost those points simply because of the reading experience. I found it, like, the chapters were way too long. it sort of jumped between POVs a little bit too much, and I just felt like the pacing was a little bit off. But the actual story I really loved. So this book follows this main female character who is the daughter of this family who has recently moved to Australia. Asian Australians, and they have just migrated to a small town outside of Sydney, Australia. This small town is a super low socioeconomic town, and it really delves into some themes of like the subtle racism in Australia and the socioeconomic backgrounds that really thrive and the ones that are held behind by the economy and the capitalistic society that we live in Australia. And it was really, really interesting to read those. The main female character has just returned to this small town to mourn with her family because her brother has been murdered. And so she is trying to work out who has murdered her brother, because the police station has pretty much said no one is talking, no one witnessed what happened, and we're at a dead end, and that's all they can do. So she's like, well, I want to work out what happened, because my brother was like straight A student, he was going to be a doctor, like he was amazing, so I need to figure out how he died, what happened. And while she's sort of investigating this crime, she finds out that her brother wasn't actually all that he was cracked up to be. He had some lies, he had some secrets in his life, and it really delves into an interesting story about like your environmental factors and how they influence you and how they really mold your personality. I'm studying to be a teacher at the moment, and it sort of reminded me of this debate that my sister and I often have about private schools versus public schools in Australia, because private schools are sort of known for having better behaviour management and like a better social aspect to the school, I would say. Whereas public education obviously is free and it's available to everyone, and the quality of teachers are the same at both of the schools, but because of the environment and because of the social aspect of public schools, a lot of the time the students aren't getting the same level of education and the same access to education or outcomes as the private school students. And I found that this book really delved into those sort of themes, because it shows how disadvantaged the people who are in this low socioeconomic town are, because there's a huge big teen crime, what can I call it, like a teen crime plague happening in the town, and like pretty much every teen in the town is on drugs and addicted to drugs or dealing drugs, and it just shows how easily a really good person can fall into these bad habits, or these habits or things that society often really looks down upon, and it's like they're a bad person, but it shows you how easily a really good person can fall into these bad habits when they're surrounded by it every day, and when that is the environment that they're growing up in. Oftentimes you can't help it, and that's just how it ends up. And it was just a really interesting book to delve into those sort of topics, and it actually gave me a really different insight into being an Asian Australian, because I'm obviously not. And yeah, I thought it delved into some really interesting themes, and if those themes sound good to you, then I would give it a go, but 3.5 stars, so do with that or what you will. The next books is actually 5 in 1. It is the Selection series. Now this is the one that I actually DNF'd a lot, so I read both of the first books straight through, and then I got to the one, and which is the third book in the series, and I got about halfway through, and then I DNF'd, and then I didn't read the last two. So pretty much this series was only going to be a trilogy, so these ones followed the same character's point of view, and then the last two is the daughter of the main character and follows her point of view. So when I sort of DNF'd the last one in this, I was like, do I really want to go into a whole different POV, a whole different POV, and a whole different storyline, a whole different character, when I'm not really enjoying the story? And I decided, no, I've got other books to read. So let's just get started. I actually really loved the plot of these books and the premise of the books, but I didn't love the writing style. And throughout the whole first two books, I was struggling to work out if I actually liked the books or not, because the plot was so interesting and different. But the writing just fell so flat for me and fell so short that I couldn't rate them really highly, and I just got sick of reading them because there wasn't much depth to the book, or much really making me want to read more. So pretty much, these are a YA romance dystopian stories. It follows the main character America and the main male character Maxon, who is the prince. And pretty much, whenever the prince is of age and ready to get married, they select about, how many was it, 50 or 30 or something, girls from all across the country to participate in this bachelor style program where the prince dates them all and works out who he wants as his wife, which is a really interesting premise. And it also has sort of like the dystopian world it's in has been built around these 8 different segregated factors of people, where 8 is like pretty much homeless, and then 1 is like royalty. And it does sort of shed a bit of light on how our capitalism does the same thing. Like, we've got the same tiers, it's just not so structured. But it was pretty interesting, but I just felt like the world building fell flat. The character building, there wasn't any. I didn't even know what the character's personality was like, and I was expected to root for her. And the romance just was not it. Like, both of the characters were cheating on each other, pretty much, emotionally and physically, but then you're still meant to root for them to get together. And I was just like, what? I don't even want them to get together at this point. So there just wasn't really anything about the books that I loved, which I'm sad to say, because I was really excited to read them based on the synopsis of them. But yeah, that was a bit of a disappointment, but that's the selection series. I would say that you should still give them a go if that sounds good to you, and if you're more of a plot-based reader, then you'll probably love them. I think I'm just more character-based than plot-based, and so when the plot was just the only thing driving the story, I was like, okay, I'm out. That was a little bit of a sad note. This last book I read this month is going to be the happy note for the video. This is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I am obsessed with this book. This is my second only ever 6-star read, and it holds up. I was nervous to read this book, nervous to pick it up, because so many people love it, and I was like, what if I don't like it? And then it's just such a letdown because I've been waiting to read this for so long. And it was just random the other night where I was like, what do I want to read? I just finished my last book. I was trying to pick what I wanted to read next, and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to read Beach Read by Emily Henry. And I'm so glad I did. I loved this book so much. This book follows Gus and, why do I not remember her name when I read it like 2 days ago? January, of course. Gus and January. January and Gus, they're both writers, but they write completely different styles of stories. January writes really fluffy sort of rom-com that always ends in a happy ending, while Gus writes sort of literary fiction, crime, like sort of stories that don't end happily. They knew each other in college. They went to the same writing classes and literary writing seminars, and so they knew each other then. But we sort of get the vibe that they never really liked each other that much. They never really knew each other that much. But when they meet up with each other, which happens because her father has just passed away, and she's found out that he has this mistress and this whole other life. He owned this house in this small town that he's given to her through his will. So she goes to this house to sort of clean it out, ready to sell it. Turns out that Gus lives next door to this house and owns the house next door, so they end up seeing each other a lot. They make this deal to swap writing styles. So Gus has to write a fluffy romance, and she has to write sort of a literary fiction, intense sort of book. So they swap writing styles, and they meet up lots more. They go on these sort of date style things to expose each other to the different lifestyles of the writers, if that makes sense. And then they fall in love and get to know each other, and it is so cute. And of course, in Emily Henry style, there are so many more things than just the romance that's like grief, love, trauma, childhood problems, relationships with parents and family, and she just always does it so well. I swear every Emily Henry book I've read has just gotten better and better and better. Like I started off with You and Me on Vacation, so good, but then I read Book Lovers and it's like, oh, this book is even better than the last one. Then I read Happy Place and I was like, oh my gosh, it's even better. And then I read this one and it's even better. So she just does it again, and I can't recommend this book enough. It is so good, and it's got like cozy vibes, it's got some sort of fluffy vibes, but it also just has everything that you need in it. Like if you want if you want a rom-com, it's that. If you want more of a deep romance, it's also that. Like it is so good, and it's not that long. It's only like 350 pages ish, and it's so good. Their banter is amazing. It's so funny. Like I was giggling, I was laughing, I was nearly crying. Like it's got everything you want in a book in this book. I highly, highly recommend this if you've liked Emily Henry's last books, if you like romance, if you like deep themes inside sort of a fluffy romance book. Like, it's just so good, and I highly recommend that book. Please read it. Please read it. Okay. That is the end of my video. This is my February reading wrap up for 2024. I hope you have enjoyed, and I hope you take some book recommendations from the video, and I will see you again for my next video. Bye.